Right, one more concept that will become important as you're trying to containerize your Next.js applications or React applications or even Node.js applications while running them locally is something called bind mounts. This, I think, was the only way to do something like volumes for the longest time, and eventually volumes were introduced because when I used to do Docker back in Goldman, like 2018, this was the first kind of volumes I was introduced to. Bind mounts have been around since the early days of Docker. Bind mounts have limited functionality compared to volumes, the thing we've already discussed. When you use a bind mount, a file or directory on the host machine is mounted to a container. What does this line mean? Basically means if this is your Mac machine and inside this you start a container, let's say a Next.js application. Until now, we've been able to mount a folder over here. For example, a folder like, slash data slash db to this volume that we had created. We've been able to mount this folder to this guy, but we haven't ever mounted a folder inside a container to a folder on the host machine. I repeat, we have never said कि भाई a folder on the host machine, a folder like slash users slash harkirat slash app is mounted to a folder inside this specific machine. What would this mean? This means कि भाई this folder and this folder on the host machine are the same. If I make a change here, it reflects over here. If I make a change here, it reflects over here. This is what is a bind mount. Basically binds a folder on your machine to a folder inside the container. When does this become important? Why do you even need it, Harkirat, when you have volumes now, which are a more fancy way to do this? This become important in some use cases. Let's discuss one such use case. Let's say I ask you to create a fresh React application. The way to do that is npx create next app latest. We've done this many times. I'm going to name this week 15.4 and press enter by default. And this could be a React application, could be a Node.js application also. The thing to learn is how can you start an application locally using Docker and have hot reloading working inside it. What do I mean by hot reloading? I mean, if I save a file, how does the Docker container process restart? Sounds a little difficult. We'll see what that means. Let's open this folder that we have just created in Visual Studio Code. This is a simple Next.js application. If I run npm run dev and open it in the browser, I see something like a basic Node Next.js boilerplate code. If I go back to app slash page.tsx, let's say, and open this on the left and open this on the right, if I make some changes in the top level layout, let's say I, remove this docs from here, I see the same change over here. If I add it back, I see the same change over here. This is what's called hot reloading. You're making changes here and they're getting replaced over here without you having to refresh the page. This is very useful in local development. What if I want to containerize this application for local development now? How would you write the Docker file for it? We have written a few Docker files now. So I'm assuming you can write this yourself from a basic node image, doesn't matter which one. It can be an Alpine image or it can be the complete Node.js image, doesn't matter. Workdir, let's say slash app, or you can call it whatever you want, slash next app, doesn't matter. Your working directory, your rules. What would be the next command? Copy package star dot run npm install, copy the rest of the files, and then cmd npm run dev. This looks like a decent-ish Docker file. If I go to my terminal, excuse me, and run docker build -t next app dot, it should build this Docker file for me with a Node.js image with this as the working directory, copy over the packages, run npm install, copy over the rest of the things, and run npm run dev. There you go. Now that this image has been created, this next app image has been created, I can run docker run -p 3000:3000 next app to start the Next.js application inside the container. And since I have a port mapping, it'll work on 3000 on my machine as well. So if you look at it, I have the Next.js application running from inside a container, something like this. It has a port mapping so that any request that's coming on the machine on port 3000 goes to the container on port 3000. This is how you would diagrammatically look at this. And this is great. If you want to give this to someone, they don't even need to have Node.js on their machine. The Docker container will bring everything inside the container, right? Run it. The problem is, okay, hot reloading will not work anymore. If I add back docs here and save it, you will see the logs don't refresh. This thing doesn't refresh. In fact, even if I refresh the page, it still has my old code. Do you understand why that is? Why does, if I make a code change here in my page.tsx in any file in this app folder on my machine, it doesn't reflect here? Why? Because this container just copied over the files once. It copied over the files, and now doesn't matter what changes I make on my host machine in the specific folder, they won't re-go into this Next.js file, right? The Next.js container, right? I'm just making changes in these files, and the Next.js container has its own set of files. If I go inside the Next.js container and change it, then it's a different story. If I let's say run docker ps here, and then do a docker exec -it container id /bin/bash, and then go to the app folder inside the container and change page.tsx. Oh, it'll be difficult, right? What can I do? Let me remove globals.css so that the CSS goes away. As you can see, if I make a change inside the container, it immediately reflects here. It does not have Vim right now. I'm sure there's a way to edit that thing. Nano edit file inside Docker container. That apt get update, apt get install Vim. Oh, and then now if I do a vim layout.tsx and try to change anything, or maybe vim page.tsx and try to change anything, basically edit things inside the container, then this does hot reload. I deleted the globals.css file, which is why you see this error. But if I did not delete it and simply edited this file inside the container, inside this guy right here, then hot reloading would work. But where would a developer make these changes? They would make these changes in Visual Studio Code. They would make these changes on the host machine over here. How can we take the changes they are making here in VS Code and put those changes to the Next.js container? Because if these changes can go here, then the Next.js process that's running here will pick them up, hot reload, and send the changes over here. For that, bind mounts can be useful, right? What were bind mounts? They said, bro, I can take a folder over here, for example, let's say the app folder over here, and mount this app folder over to a folder inside this Next.js container. For example, the /next_app/app folder. If I can do this, if I can mount the app folder in Visual Studio Code, which is this folder right here, to the /next_app/app folder on the container, which is this folder right here. If this and this get mounted, a folder inside the container gets bind mounted to a folder on my machine, then they both mean the same thing. If I make a change here, it will show up here. If I make a change here, it will show up here. Then if a developer goes to Visual Studio Code and makes a changes, that will immediately reflect in the container and Next.js will hot reload. Let's try that and see if it actually works or not. Let me first exit this Docker container. For that, Docker ps and then Docker kill the container ID. Then when I'm starting the image, I'm going to add a mount that says the app folder in here, the app folder in the host machine mounts to /nextapp/app. Where does next app come from? Next app comes from the working directory inside the container, and the app folder inside that working directory is what needs to be mounted to the app folder here, so that if there's any change I make in any of these files, it reflects over here. If you want to add even deeper hot reloading, if you want to make sure that any change from here also reaches there, you can either just mount the root folder, although this will create a few issues, or you can mount multiple folders. I will mount public also, I will mount app also, so on and so forth. But usually, where are all the developers making the changes? In this app folder, right? They'll add a bunch of things here, maybe in a components folder as well, but they won't be making a lot of changes in the root folder, which is why just having a single volume that mounts app is a great start. Of course, if you have a components folder, you should mount that as well, so on and so forth. Now, if I run this -p 3000:3000, let me remove this. What is the difference now? I have added this bind mount, and now if I go to localhost :3000, I see the page. But more importantly, if I make any file edit, for example, I remove this learn from here and save, you will see this reloaded. You will see learn went away from here. If I add it back, you will see this compiled again and learn came back. So this is how you would give a real local development experience to your end user, because your end user needs to have hot reloading, right? You can't expect your end user they will start a Docker container and then they will edit the file and then they will stop the Docker container and restart the Docker container and see their changes. They need the thing to hot reload, and this is the best way you can do it, probably the only way you can do it, which is you need a bind mount from a folder on your machine to the container, so that if there is a change made here, that same change is made in this container as well, and whatever Next.js process is running here, the npm run dev that's running inside the container realizes that a file has changed and hot reloads the page and you see the changes here. So that's all I had for this one. If you want an exercise after this, you can go to code 100x CMS. Basically this code base, whoever wrote the Docker file, actually did not. If you go to Docker Compose over here, basically, you will see there is no bind mount over here. There is one to node modules, but there isn't. Oh no, there is one. Never mind. Spoke too soon. This is, it already has a bind mount. So as you can see here also, the person who has created the CMS repository Docker file, he says by the complete folder is mounted to /user/source/app, so that if you make any change here, it gets put in the working directory of the container as well. This is the working directory that they have used, /user/source/app. The reason for this is, go back here, Docker file /user/source/app. The reason for this is the same. If you make a change here, it hot reloads and shows in the other place. That's all I had for this one. I hope you understand bind mounts. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.